From Korea to Germany. From Alaska to Puerto Rico. All over the world, the United States Army is on the alert to defend our country, you, the American people, against aggression. This is The Big Picture, an official television report to the nation from the United States Army. Now, to show you part of the big picture, here is Sergeant James Mansfield.
Welcome to The Big Picture. I'm sure you all remember General Patton's famous drive into the heart of Germany during the last war. It was an advance so strong and so rapid that the Third Army outran its terrain maps and stretched its supply lines to the limit. Today, we're going to tell you the story of that Third Army and the men who fought in it. Later on in the program, Colonel Quinn will have an interesting interview for you with Colonel Sam Goodwin of the Third Army. And now, to speak for the man who wears the blue badge, the combat infantryman, we take you to the office of Colonel William W. Quinn.
How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? If you recall, last week we told you about the 82nd Airborne Division and about paratroopers. This week we're going to have a change of pace and tell you about tanks, and particularly about the 3rd United States Army. We'll have a guest later on who will specifically talk to us about the tank infantry team. And now, the blue badge proudly presents the 3rd United States Army.
Army's war in Europe was over, it came home and took up its headquarters at Fort McPherson, Georgia. Many of its wartime veterans re-enlisted, staying with the new recruits, streaming in every day, learning the know-how of the newest inventions, the new military technology, training at different stations in 3rd Army's 7-state area. They learn how to operate new armored tanks, turn them in a space no wider than their own length. Signal Corps soldiers learn how to use the newest inventions and techniques, how to keep the lines of communication open, how to lay wire across a deep, swift stream in a few seconds. New weapons, new skills improve the chances for national defense and prepare the recruits to step into positions in the country's peacetime pursuits. Airborne troops are conditioned to fit into the air age. Learn how to take a parachute jump in their stride. How to battle a wind-blown bucking parachute on the ground and overcome it. All toward the end, that in national emergency, troops using everything the new military technology affords them can form one solid, unbreachable front, keeping bright the wartime record for hard-driving, hard-hitting impact set by the loyalty and the fighting spirit of the famous 3rd Army. Let's look at the record. In Europe, the 3rd U.S. Army bore the code name of Lucky. Their luck was that they never depended on luck to win a battle. They knew the one way to bring a bitter war to a quick end was to destroy the enemy in the field. Smash and knock out his materiel and firepower. To wipe out, rout, or capture his manpower. To liberate the enemy-held towns and restore them to their loyal citizens. 3rd Army's 6 different corps were covered in the air by 9th Air Force's 19th Tactical Air Command. Men came from every state in the Union, wearing patches of those divisions, which at various times during the 281 fighting days in Europe, served under 3rd Army's command. General George S. Patton, commanding general of 3rd Army, had his design for combat. Hit the Germans, hit them again, keep them off balance, confuse them, discourage them, drive forward, always forward. Soldiers were conditioned toward one objective: get that German first. Surprise, skill, power. The triad for victory against a strong, well-trained enemy. While Third Army was landing secretly at Utah Beach, gathering its strength quietly, moving forward quietly, First Army contained Normandy, this side of the French town of Avranches. Security measures were so good that when the Third Army breakthrough came at Avranches, it came as a complete surprise to the Germans. In the first shock, the Germans rushed to give themselves up. They came in from all directions. Materiel and great stores of supplies were destroyed in that initial breakthrough. Its success separated Brittany from the rest of German-held France. Third Army headed in 3 directions, fighting in 3 directions at one time: west to Saint-Malo and the port of Brest, south to Rennes, the capital of Brittany, and east toward Paris. Captured German films show, however, that the German armies were anything but a pushover. They had trained, disciplined, seasoned troops. Frightened towns had been easy prey for the Germans. Now they fought hard to hold what had been so easy to take. But nothing stopped the onrushing Third Army. Third Army headed for the coast town of Saint-Malo, key point in the enemy defense line. They battered it with heavy guns, sent their riflemen into the town. Fought the Germans from street to street and from house to house. Dug them out of the solid stone houses, each a fortress in itself. Killed them in cellars like rats. Third Army captured the town. One enemy stronghold still held out. The German clung to his fortress on its offshore island. Third Army pounded it, turned some of the Germans' own guns against it. To prevent needless death and destruction, Third Army improvised a truce plane and flew it to the island with a plan of surrender. The Germans chose to ignore it. Third Army concentrated on a swift reduction of the fort. 19th Tactical Air Command blasted it from the air, swooped over the island, dropped its belly loads of eggs, sent this spectacular line of waterspouts into the air. Heavy artillery laid down fire that quickly reduced the fortress to helpless rubble. The Germans gave up. Saint-Malo surrendered. The way was open for the drive toward the west. Third Army was on its way to the Brittany port of Brest, with its great German submarine base on the Atlantic. In all this fighting, ground troops, supported by tanks, set a pattern for combat. Typical of the French towns next liberated by Third Army was the German-held city of Rennes, capital of Brittany. American paratroopers, previously taken prisoner by the Germans, were released. French mademoiselles left no doubt about their feeling for the American liberators. Heroes fared well. Frenchmen brought out their best vintage wines for men of Third Army. A French-American entente cordiale was reestablished. The mayor made a speech. In quick succession, the French towns were freed. Third Army took the rules of the game laid down by the Germans themselves and then beat the living daylights out of them at their own game. This was the beginning of the Germans' blitzkrieg in reverse. The Loire River, with its stronghold towns, was the next objective. Third Army now most definitely knew where it was going and hadn't the least doubt about getting there. They were on their way. The swift advance posed a tremendous problem in logistics. 250,000 men had to be fed, clothed, equipped, bedded down every day. Trucks and tanks needed gasoline. Every pound had to be hauled and lugged. Men of the transportation units made their great contribution to victory in this Battle of France. In the west, Third Army stepped up the attack on Brest. Monster guns pumped shells into that port and wiped the German submarine menace from the Atlantic sea lanes. The Commander-in-Chief, General Eisenhower, viewed the progress of battle and found it good. Brest surrendered. All through the fighting, Third Army had tight support from the 19th Tactical Air Command. The 19th wove a net of protective air cover that caught any foolhardy German aircraft in the meshes, chased it scurrying back to the ground, or knocked plane and pilot completely out of the air. They kept the air lanes free for our own bombers. Expert skip bombing was developed that sent hits skimming along the ground into tunnels and caught the few precious supply trains the Germans still could operate, strafed them, blew them up. Deep rivers brought out Third Army engineers. Pontons were lined up. Prefabricated Bailey Bridge sections were laid. Steel fairly walked across the water. Construction gangs and Bailey bridges weren't always at hand, but the enemy Germans were. They clung to these natural defenses and made crossings an invitation to sudden death. Third Army's war, at times like this, narrowed down to the close confines of a personal matter, bullet for bullet. Third Army men usually got their objective. But not always without damage. Teamwork in the Third Army started from the ground up. Individual disaster became company concern. With the town of Troyes in their hands, Third Army came into the area of well-remembered names of World War I. Troyes, Reims, Verdun, Nancy. Each name carried grim memories. Here they were, all again, and once again, all under fire. Reims, with its famous cathedral, bolstered and protected by sandbags. Once again, Reims became one of war's major targets. Verdun. Third Army men who had fought in the First War and remembered Verdun for its mud and rain now saw it again. Third Army had another date waiting for it, the Fort Ring city of Metz. The Germans made it their showpiece. It was advertised as the impregnable, unbeatable stronghold of the master race. The town had never in modern history been taken by assault. Third Army now went out to do just that, direct penetration. They blasted the forts and battered the town in one of the bloodiest of actions. The forts were knocked out. Third Army Army had no cheap victories. The Germans fought stubbornly. Metz brought more street-to-street combat, more house-to-house fighting. Third Army got them all, shot them out from their cover. Surrender of Metz opened the path for the great drive into Germany itself. This was the moment. The Siegfried Line was to be breached. The German sacred Rhine River was to be crossed. Then, on 16 December, plans went into eclipse. The bottom fell out. The enemy had one ace left in his military pack. He played it. The Germans quite literally threw everything they had into this last solid massed effort. They started their drive through the Ardennes, drove a deep salient into the Allied lines, widened it, blew it out to a bulge, engulfed Bastogne. They surrounded the town, but could not take it. Our troops there were isolated. Third Army was ordered to the rescue, to break the German iron ring encircling the town, to release the Americans trapped there. Relief of Bastogne became a battle cry. The Battle of the Bulge was on. Third Army started the greatest wheeling movement ever attempted in wartime logistics. An abrupt right-angle change in direction from a course already in operation by an entire army overnight. The bulk of 300,000 troops, with fighting gear and supplies, disengaged itself from contact with the enemy in the east, took a sharp turn north, plowed a path right through its own supply lines. This forced march had an atmosphere of unreality about it. Third Army had to contend with snow, sleet, mud, fog. Bitter winter weather was all on the side of the Germans. Tanks went out of control, skidded and slid. Sleet-covered roads brought their own war casualties in tanks and trucks. The troops in Bastogne held fast, waiting for the relief of the city by Third Army. Signal Corps men fought their Battle of the Bulge, too, against ice, snow, and freezing cold, kept Third Army lifelines of command open. Third Army arrived with guns firing. Bastogne became a kind of valley forge for the Third Army, but a valley forge with an enemy pounding in from all sides. Everything Third Army had on the ground went into action. One thing more would tie it all up into a quick victory package, attack by air. But the weather held. There was lots of it, all bad. Air forces were immobilized. General Patton called the Third Army chaplain to him, asked that a prayer be offered, a soldier's prayer, fair weather for battle. The prayer was made. Almighty and most merciful Father, restrain these immoderate rains. Grant us fair weather for battle. Establish thy justice among men and nations. Amen. Call it a miracle. The day before Christmas came as a real gift. Perfect flying weather. Our planes took to the air, poured it on the Germans. More planes followed, and more. Isolated Bastogne was fed by airdrop. Medical supplies went in. Ground forces kept pouring it on the Germans below. Destroyed them in the snow. 2 days after Christmas, Third Army broke the German lines, curled back their flanks, made first contact with the men in Bastogne. The siege of Bastogne was lifted. The German bulge finally deflated. Third Army turned its fighting strength against the Siegfried Line in the Rhine River. The Germans had no place to go now but home. But SS troops were in the way, so they stuck around, fought, gave themselves up, or were killed. Third Army tore its way through the dragon teeth of the Siegfried Line, came to the Rhine River and the German town of Frankfurt. Plans called for speed, but not recklessness. Our forces advanced cautiously. The trapped Germans were more dangerous than ever. The fighting at Frankfurt was of a piece with that along the length of the Rhine. but there was now no place to hide. The Germans had come to the payoff. Third Army riflemen took them as they came, cut them up, destroyed them in isolated pockets. Frankfurt went the way of all the German towns. Their world was at its end. The German towns of Darmstadt, Hanau, Wiesbaden followed Frankfurt. Third Army, under General Patton, never lost a battle. The Great Drive was nearing its last objective, the complete and total defeat of the Germans. The campaign in France, the Moselle, capture of Metz and the Saar campaign, Bastogne, forcing the Rhine, the capture of Trier, Koblenz, the Palatinate, Frankfurt. The way finally was open to the total collapse of all German-held land. Third Army overran the west of Germany. They fanned out and swept south, crossed the Danube. German armies were shot to pieces. Their disorganized leaders were captured or destroyed. Troops surrendered by whole divisions and corps. Their generals gave up their batons, their battered armies, their now discredited authority. Germany's war was over. Third Army's fighting was over, with honor and glory enough for every Third Army man. Typical of the many honors to Third Army enlisted men and officers at different times and in different places was the ceremony at Lisch, Germany, where General Patton presented the Congressional Medal of Honor to Private Harold A. Garman. A fit tribute to the fighting spirit, to the loyalty of the troops of Third Army who fought the 281 days on the 1,000 miles of foreign soil are the words spoken by General Patton. There are men Third Army will never forget.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to present to you Lieutenant Colonel Samuel M. Goodwin, who I believe if we'd known where to look, we might have found him in the film we just seen of the Third Army. Glad to have you aboard, Sam. Sam is your nickname, I believe.
Yes, sir, and it's good to be here.
Sam, incidentally, what is your hometown?
I can't give you a direct answer to that question, Colonel, for I was born and raised in the Army. My father lived many places in the United States and at some overseas station while I was growing.
I know what you mean. You have no home. What is your duty now, incidentally?
At the present time, I'm a planner in the office of the Assistant Chief of Staff, G3, in Washington.
Well, I was correct when I said that you were in the Third Army.
You were, sir?
What outfit were you in?
Throughout my combat experience in Europe, I commanded the 6th Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron of the 6th Cavalry Group that fought across France, Germany, and into Czechoslovakia with Patton's Third Army.
Well, in connection with the use of tanks, I'd like to ask you a basic question. And what is the prime purpose of a tank?
The tank is an armored shield surrounding a gasoline engine, today one big gun and several small machine guns. It's designed to perform the mission of mobility, firepower, and shock on the battlefield.
Well, Sam, when were tanks first employed?
The first tanks in any quantity used on a modern battlefield occurred in 1916, when at Ypres, the British used about 50 tanks. It's interesting to note that the tank was a name used by the British to conceal what project they were constructing in 1914 to 16. And the present Prime Minister of Great Britain, Winston Churchill, as an Undersecretary in the Admiralty, was responsible for the project. Many of the terms used in armor find their origin in naval terms, like the turret, the deck, and ports.
Well, you can. It's considered to be or the fact is that the initial uses of the tank were successful.
Successful locally and for their purpose. However, the use of that weapon was not fully exploited, probably because the leaders who had the weapon didn't know or realize the value of what they had found.
Well, let me ask you this, Sam. Have there been any great changes in tactics or the employment of the tank since it was first used?
Fundamentally, armor of today is the heir to the traditional cavalry mission of military history. And, however, the tanks of World War II were much more closely integrated with infantrymen than those of the First World War. And even today, we find a more intimate integration, where there are available to commanders at all echelons of military organization tank and infantry teams.
Well, that brings up, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it brings up another point as to the tank infantry team. And I'd like to ask you this question. What do you consider to be the most important elements in a well-trained tank infantry team?
The first element is teamwork, an understanding of the capabilities and limitations, the tanker of the infantryman on or outside his tank, and the infantryman of the men and the weapons within the tank. Secondly is communications, the ability of one to talk to the other. And third is maneuverability, the ability to go across the ground toward the common objective.
Well, Sam, I get out of this one important factor. I believe you believe that the tank is here to stay.
I'm convinced of that.
Well, thanks a lot, Sam. Colonel Goodwin. Ladies and gentlemen, please meet with us again when we tell you and talk about the combat medical man. And be sure not to miss the interview with Colonel Canada, who's the former surgeon to General MacArthur in the Far East Command. So until next week, this is Colonel Quinn speaking for the combat infantryman who ask you to look twice at the man who wears the blue badge. It's the mark of a man.
The Big Picture is a weekly television report to the nation on the activities of the Army at home and overseas. Produced by the Signal Corps Pictorial Center. Presented by the U.S. Army in cooperation with this station. You can be an important part of the big picture. You can proudly serve with the best equipped, the best trained, the best fighting team in the world today, the United States Army. From Korea to Germany. From Alaska to Puerto Rico. All over the world, the United States Army is on the alert to defend our country, you, the American people, against aggression. This is the Big Picture, an official television report to the nation from the United States Army. Now, to show you part of the big picture, here is Sergeant Stuart Queen.
Our story today is Third Army, another in a special series of first-hand reports on the continental armies of the United States. If you have ever visited certain portions of the southeastern area of America, you have no doubt at some time seen parachutes floating to earth. You may have wondered where they came from and how men were trained in this type of duty. Well, that's just one of the many activities you'll see and hear about. Our guide on this tour of Third Army is Lieutenant John Mortimer.
This is Lieutenant John Mortimer. Another chapter is about to begin in the story of our Army areas in the zone of the interior. The big picture camera truck slows down as it enters the gate at Fort McPherson, Georgia. This is headquarters of the Third Army. It is from this post that our tour of the Third Army installations and activities will begin. We're a little early for our appointment with Lieutenant General A.R. Bowling, Commanding General of Third Army. So let's stop off in Patton Hall for a look-in at a meeting of the Area Army Advisory Committee. The gentlemen on the left are Mr. Earl Koch, Jr. and Dr. Allen Albert. The other man is Mr. Richard Rich, Chairman of the Atlanta Army Advisory Committee.
Would you tell us just how you function with the Army?
Well, Lieutenant, the Army Advisory Group was organized right after the last World War with the thought that in a democracy, the military should know more about the community in which they live, and the citizens at large should know more about the problems of the military. And the group was organized for the purpose of sort of acting as a liaison, coordinator, to integrate these two groups of citizens together into the community, and I think it's a very worthy and desirable objective.
I see. Now, do you function for the Army as a whole or just for Third Army?
Well, we actually function for the whole system of national defense, actually, because we have an opportunity not only in Army areas such as the 3rd, but throughout the nation. There's civilian aides to the Secretary of the Army in every state, as well as an advisory group throughout the entire Army area of all Army areas.
Now, Doctor, how many advisors are there per state?
Well, there's an advisor for each state. In Georgia, it happens that there are 2 of us.
Why is that?
Well, I think that's probably because of the very large number of troops that there are in this state. It's a very, very important state from a military standpoint. And we have special problems, too, which have to do very largely with the matter of community facilities, the type of housing that's available, and so on, because we've moved in a lot of people in here in a very few years.
I think it's always well worth pointing out that most of us are natives of the area that we come from. My accent wouldn't reflect that, I'm sure.
Well, thank you very much.
Now it's time for our appointment with General Bowling, who is to tell us of Third Army's history and its mission.
The Third Army was activated on November 7th, 1918 at Chaumont, France. It had occupation duty on the Rhine until it was inactivated on July 2nd, 1919. The Third Army patch, that is the white A on the blue background, signifies the Army of Occupation in Germany in World War I. The Third Army was reactivated at Fort Sam Houston, Texas on October 1st, 1940, and became operational August 1st, 1944, under the command of General Patton. After VE Day, it occupied Germany, May 9, 1945 to 15 February 1947. Later, the designation of the Third Army was transferred from Germany to Atlanta, Georgia on March 14, 1947. This army had 281 days of campaign, that is from August 1, 44 to May 9, 45. It captured over 81,000 square miles, 1,200 cities, over 1,280,000 prisoners, and had a total number of casualties of 160,000.
General Bowling has personally devised our itinerary for the high spots of his command, and we are on our way. First stop is to be an establishment that is now in its 36th year of operation. Fort Benning, home of the infantry school. Since 1919, millions of soldiers have learned basic and advanced tactics at this place. The men we see now are in the officer candidate school. These future leaders undergo intensive training in every phase of military knowledge needed for leadership. All of them are men from the ranks who have been selected for advancement. Most of the activity at Fort Benning revolves around the infantry school. The soldier students are here to sharpen their abilities as infantrymen and to learn of the new developments in this complicated business of defense. Our big picture camera truck trundles over rough terrain to watch one of the many demonstrations which clearly illustrate the problems learned in class. Major Mansfield holds the microphone.
Gentlemen, earlier this afternoon we have discussed the methods of attack and the fundamentals that goes in having infantry and tanks work together. Now let's look at the component parts of this small but highly effective infantry tank team. We have on one side combat infantrymen. Here's a typical squad coming into position on your left.
Watch, pull. Order, pull. Right, peace. Great, tip.
All of you gentlemen are familiar with this rifle squad and the weapons with which they are armed. I'd like for you to note the added firepower in the present rifle squad of the extra BAR. Now the other member of this team are the tanks that you see sitting further to your left. Those 5 tanks are one platoon that make up the normal infantry tank team when they are attached to a rifle company. How would you, as the future rifle company commander, like to have a platoon of tanks attached to your rifle company? Do you realize that on each tank, in addition to the several machine guns, they have their normal armament, the 90mm gun? Now, gentlemen, those tanks only fired 13 seconds. You can see the added firepower that we have within those tanks. Now, we must know how to use it to get the maximum from the capabilities that's here for our use. Now, gentlemen, this particular firing that you've seen by this tank platoon, we call saturation fire. We must realize our part that we must play as instruments to protect these tanks. There are many weapons and obstacles on the battlefield which affect the operation of these tanks to a great deal more than they do our infantry. We must serve as instruments, as the eyes and ears, in many cases, for these tanks. An example of this is a tank hunter team. What is a tank hunter team? A tank hunter team is any group of infantrymen armed with a short range anti-tank weapon. Here is a friendly tank hunter team going into position with a rocket launcher. Now you can see that particular team is quite effective against a lone and isolated tank. And it is our duty and our responsibility to pick that up and destroy it by the use of our infantry weapons. I would like for you now to move forward to the bleachers to your front to witness a demonstration which will be composed of a infantry platoon and a tank platoon in the assault of an objective. Move forward, please.
All right. Major, while you have a free moment, will you tell us what you call this problem?
This is called the infantry tank team in the assault.
And what is the purpose of this problem here?
Well, the purpose is to show the value of having infantry and tanks together, the mutual support that can be gained from the two when placed in a team.
Now, has this class had any previous instruction in the infantry tank team?
Well, they've had technical training as far as the weapons are concerned, and they've been given classroom instructions on the tank company infantry regiment as to its tactics and organization.
Now, will they participate in this problem which you have going on out here?
Well, not in the live firing demonstration at first, but they will participate after the demonstration in a lane work, each of the individuals, members of the class, serving as a infantry platoon leader, working with a section of tanks.
Well, that's a lot of firepower that we witnessed there earlier in your demonstration.
Absolutely, and all of that you did witness and will witness is real live ammunition, giving as much training as we can to these men.
The real thing, in other words.
That's correct.
Well, I see your class is ready. Thank you very much,
Right.
sir.
Thanks for coming in.
We are now in the forward position for the purpose of witnessing the demonstration between the infantry tank team. You imagine yourself as being in the zone of the attacking battalion. This particular company's zone of action that you're in has a platoon of tanks attached to it. Your zone that will take place immediately to your front, we have a tremendous amount of firepower at the command of this rifle company commander. He will use all of this that he possibly can. Pay attention to his fire support plan. Gentlemen, this concludes our demonstration. The troops for this afternoon were furnished by Able Company of the 30th Infantry and Dog Company of the 30th Infantry. The tanks were from the 550th Tank Company. Now, if you will, thank you, if you will move right out to your lane work. Move out, please.
And we were on our way too. Our destination, Camp Gordon near Augusta, Georgia. At the Provost Marshal General Center, military police trainees receive instruction in traffic control. We are seeing how a trainee is put through his paces here at Traffic City. Intensive drilling in traffic control signals helps the trainee to develop confidence, proper body stance, and clear, sharp hand and arm movements. These are necessary to a smooth, authoritative performance in guiding heavy traffic. The Criminal Investigation Laboratory is the only military criminal lab in the zone of the interior.
Lieutenant Colonel Tolkien is the officer in charge here at the Criminal Investigation Laboratory. Colonel, I see you have two tests going on here. What is this first one?
This man here is now determining whether a narcotic or one of the barbiturates is present in evidence submitted by a field investigating detachment. We have many tests of this type being performed at all times.
And the second test, I see some GI socks.
Oh, yeah, this is a case that is rather peculiar. It was sent in to us from a storage depot in the Alaskan Command, and these Army socks were subjected to a fire of unknown origin. It is up to us to determine, if possible, the cause of that fire.
Then you're going to sort of recreate the fire.
Yes. This test that is now being conducted is to determine the ignition temperature point. And from that, we can determine whether the article itself is of a combustible nature or whether it was intentionally set. And we hope to be of an assistance in the solution of this case before we are through.
Well, that's very interesting, Colonel. Thank you for talking to the big picture camera.
Very glad to have been able to assist you.
Bye now.
Another important activity at Camp Gordon is the training of communication specialists who study at the Signal Corps Training Center. This small group is inspecting a modern tool of a soldier called Radiac, a supersensitive instrument used to detect and compute radioactive particles present after an atomic explosion. An interesting spectacle is the pole orchard. A game of catch is useful in teaching these lineman trainees to become free and easy while perched at the top of a telephone pole. As for getting down in a hurry, training by closed-circuit television transmission is another feature of the Southeastern Signal School. We're going to visit one of the classrooms which use this electronic teaching miracle and learn more about it from Lieutenant Colonel White.
Carrier repeater system. With the switch down in DC line position, then your magnet...
Colonel, if we'll step back, I'd like to have you tell our big picture audience just about this Broad Horizon TV classroom here.
Certainly, Lieutenant. Here in the Southeastern Signal School, for some time we have been conducting experiments in the use of television as an aid to military instruction. We have progressed to the point where a number of hours of instruction are given during the regular courses here in the school. We find that we are able to bring to the attention of the students, all of the students, not merely those in the front row, the various intricate, small, and complicated parts which are used in various items of signal equipment.
Was this something that is going to be Army-wide someday, Colonel?
We expect that it will, Lieutenant. We're quite confident that it will in the future.
That's a great field.
We think so.
It really can help instruction.
It has been a great help to us thus far, and we expect that it will become even better.
Thank you very much, sir.
Not at all.
We'll be heading north now, on our way to a point 50 miles below the state capital of North Carolina, to Fort Bragg, home of the famed 18th Airborne Corps. But before seeing the big show, we're going to stop by to see a bit of a little-known activity, the Army Psychological Warfare Center.
Lieutenant Marty Moore here, who is chief of the leaflet section, knows a lot about psychological warfare. Lieutenant, how would you sum up Psy-War?
Sum it up? Well, I would say that psychological warfare is the actual dissemination of facts to the enemy
with the intention in mind of lowering his morale, of his emotions, or his ability to fight. That's quite a mission. Yes, that's one of the toughest jobs in psychological warfare, in actually convincing the enemy soldier or the civilian that we are telling him the truth. You know, if the enemy ever caught us in telling him a big lie, then we would actually be in a bad shape for psychological warfare. If he ever did catch us, all of the work done by the men here in this section and the linguists, the propagandists, all throughout the group would be done in vain. Yes, with us in psychological warfare, the big lie technique is completely out.
Well, do you have a outside unit or a mobile unit that spreads us?
Yes, would you like to go down now and watch our L&L teams work out?
Certainly would.
A short walk and we're at the site of the field unit.
See the Jeep over there? Listen. What is he saying? Attention, attention.
軍人的中國人民政府，我是一個自由人民，向聯合國代表。
Soldiers of the Chinese Communist Army, this is the voice of United Nations. This is the voice of the peoples of peace.
你們的糧食不久能燃燒。
Soon you will have no more food. It is senseless to continue fighting. Use your safe conduct passes. Come over to United Nations lines.
Very interesting. Thank you very much, Lieutenant.
You're more than welcome, Lieutenant Mortimer.
Perhaps the most exciting outfit at Fort Bragg is the 18th Airborne Corps. That's Major General Cleland, Major General Farrell, Brigadier General Walker, and Brigadier General Daniel. They're going to lead their units in a practice jump, and with just a little persuasion, we might get them to let the big picture camera crew go along. It was suggested that we become temporary members of the 18th and participate. And before he can change his mind, your guide is being strapped in a parachute. While the plane is loaded, I'm trying to remember all I ever knew about the proper method of making a jump. Because after that door closed, there was no way to get back to the ground again except by the same route as all the others. During the flight, I sit next to General Cleland, who wears the wings of a master jumper. He briefed me on what was to come, and we are going to jump from a medium altitude, 1,800 feet. The pilots fly to our target area, and from then on, things happen in a hurry. The general is first out of the plane, and I'm right after him. And this is the way the ground looks from an altitude of less than 1/3 of a mile. The general shouts instructions to me as we lead a long line of chutes. Then we make our landings. Watch the way the general made his. In a few moments, we are picked up and taken to the collection point. And I must say that your guide is having one of the big thrills of his Army career.
Let me take this microphone, General. How was it? How'd I do for an amateur, sir?
You look like a veteran trooper coming out the door there.
Well, it was quite an experience.
Well, it was mighty fine that you could go along with us, and remarkable that you could make that exit on the second jump as well as you did.
Thank you, sir. I noticed that you came down standing up, sir.
That's right. That was my 67th jump, and the first time I've made a standing landing.
A first time?
First time.
Oh, that's quite wonderful. Who were the rest of the people who were jumping with us today?
Well, these are all our good chaplains from all the airborne units here at Bragg. Every denomination. These chaplains jump with the men constantly. They're always with them.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, it's quite an experience, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.
Right, sir.
No charge.
Hey.
We leave Fort Bragg and head for Alabama, and an installation which started as an artillery range and grew into what has been called a military showplace. Fort McClellan is our destination. This post is the home of the Chemical Corps School, which provides instruction in chemical warfare theories and techniques to students from all branches of the armed forces and to military personnel from friendly foreign nations. Much of the work here is done in the field, where the Chemical Corps School conducts many kinds of experiments and practice problems. We are in time to witness one of them. In this case, clouds of smoke create a situation for a decontamination exercise. Carrying spray guns and other equipment, the students pierce the smoke-filled field and start their operations. This particular problem is to free equipment from dangerous chemicals or gases. Wearing their special clothing, these men look as though they came from a planet from out of space. Let's find out a little more about these men in their mysterious garb.
What is the purpose of the smoke, Lieutenant?
The smoke, in this case, is used to simulate a CBR attack. Usually we put mild chemical irritants in it to make the decontamination personnel realize the situation is here. Today, however, there are none of those chemical irritants in the smoke.
Well, I thought as much, being out here without any mask on or one of these protective garbs. Now, you mentioned CBR agents. What are they?
Well, CBR agents are chemical, biological, and radiological agents used in warfare.
What are these suits made out of, these special uniforms like?
The uniform that I have on here is an impermeable uniform. It's made of butyl rubber. It protects us from harmful chemical and biological agents by keeping them out or excluding them from our body. And there's another uniform that we have that you see here. This is what we call combat protective clothing. This clothing has put into it certain chemicals which tend to neutralize chemical agents and tends to kill some biological agents. Now, the uniform that the combat soldier wears is not as good a uniform, doesn't give as good a protection as does the uniform I'm wearing here. But it is a good uniform. An infantryman can conduct his mission, can go ahead and effect his mission while wearing these clothing.
Do you ever use the real thing, the real gases in this training?
We surely do. We use very realistic training here. At the beginning of this exercise, or just prior to the beginning, we place contamination, CBR contamination, on this equipment.
I see.
And so these personnel are actually doing decontamination as we would do it, as we'd find contaminated equipment in the field.
Well, thank you very much, Lieutenant. Very interesting.
Thank you very much.
We leave Fort McClellan and travel to our last stop in the 3rd Army area, Fort Jackson, South Carolina. On flanking signs at the impressive entrance to the Leader's School, one reads of the infantryman's mission and his motto on the other side. Our first stop is to watch a group in the infantry leader's course, faced with the problem of fording a stream bearing a wounded buddy.
A medical corps man gives him advice and encouragement of a sort.
Okay, you gather him in and die before you get him across. What are you waiting for? Are you wanting to drown, huh? Come on! Boy, I'm so glad I'm not in this shoot. I didn't pin on lifesavers like you. Come on, head over there.
That extra tough talk is premeditated. The hazing received in exercises like this is a supreme test of potential leader's ability to keep his head under the most trying circumstances and conditions. All the techniques adapted to foot soldiering from time immemorial are taught here at Fort Jackson. On this field, effective concealment practices are demonstrated for trainees, and to some of them, it's entertaining as well as instructive. Camouflage of equipment, not only from ground observance, but from the air as well, is another phase of knowledge imparted to these new soldiers who have only just begun their military service. And as these men begin their training as soldiers on a huge post in South Carolina, named for one of America's great historical figures, Andrew Jackson, the big picture camera ends its tour of the 3rd Army area. We've traveled hundreds of miles through the southeastern United States to bring you the highlights. Now our direction is to the westward. This is Lieutenant John Mortimer, inviting you to come along with us again next week when we visit San Antonio, Texas, and begin our tour of Fourth Army.
That's the story of Third Army, another in a special series of guided tours through the Continental Armies of America. Next week, Lieutenant John Mortimer will again be our escort when we'll be traveling through the area of Fourth Army. The marked contrast between the Army of today, which employs weapons such as guided missiles, and that of a century ago can be clearly seen when we visit many historic relics of America's westward expansion. This is Sergeant Stuart Queen inviting you to tune in again next week for another look at your Army in action on The Big Picture.
The Big Picture is a weekly television report to the nation on the activities of the Army at home and overseas. Produced by the Signal Corps Pictorial Center. Presented by the U.S. Army in cooperation with this station. You can be an important part of the big picture. You can proudly serve with the best equipped, the best trained, the best fighting team in the world today, the United States Army.
Check. Checkmate.
I should know better than to play chess with a military man.
Fred, I've noted that you usually take pretty good care of yourself. I wouldn't worry about that.
No, I expected to play a friendly game of chess, and what happens? Suddenly, I'm up against Lieutenant General Albert Watson, Commanding General of the Third Army. Now, see, to me, these are formations of chessmen. The way you handle them, they're military installations.
Funny how people think of an army. Usually it's in terms of installations, numbers of troops, and masses of equipment. But an army is more than that, Fred. More than the numbers, the buildings, and the hardware. They don't begin to tell the story, not the real story. The Third Army is a living, vital thing, not a collection of statistics. It has a history, a tradition, and a strong underlying purpose, namely, to meet any challenge that may threaten the life of this nation and the preservation of peace in the world. But more than anything else, the Army is people, all kinds of people, representing a vast complex of knowledge, skill, and energy. This is the mission and the meaning of the 192 active units of the Third Army.
In World War II, under the leadership of General George S. Patton, the Third Army drove its way into history across the French countryside in a daring thrust toward the heart of Germany. Never before had a military force moved with such speed and optimism. Known as the Lorraine Campaign, the rapid advance of Third Army units in 1944 set an example in mobility and demonstrated the power of United States arms and armor. In one of the ironic twists of the war, General Patton's forces advanced so swiftly that they outran their gasoline supplies, and the drive had to be temporarily halted until more fuel could be obtained. During those dramatic months at the close of the Second World War, elements of the Third Army were part of an Allied spearhead which was to liberate a conquered Europe. Today, that fast, hard-hitting combat tradition has become the driving force behind the modern Third Army, one of the 6 major tactical subdivisions of the United States Continental Army Command. Located in 7 states of the Southeast, the Third Army includes many of the nation's major military installations: Fort Benning, Fort Bragg, Fort Gordon, Fort McClellan, Fort Jackson, Fort Stewart, Fort Rucker, Fort Campbell, Redstone Arsenal, and Third Army headquarters at Fort McPherson, Georgia. Here is the administrative center for all Third Army activities. The principal mission of the command is to train and provide administrative support for strategic Army forces located at Third Army installations, and to support logistically the various Army schools in the area. Each year, the Third Army has the responsibility of training approximately 17,000 replacement troops. For the recruit, the conversion from civilian to soldier may begin at one of the Third Army's large training centers, such as Fort Gordon. The Army's need for rugged, intelligent, and dedicated soldiers is met by training programs which emphasize from the beginning the disciplines and capabilities demanded of the modern fighting man. This demand places a firm responsibility on the individual soldier whose mission is to defend his country, to fight and win any type of war. To take or regain ground is a main objective of the land soldier. Third Army training programs stress the soldier's ability to take care of himself in any combat situation. The soldier may continue his military education at any of the 9 specialty schools of the Continental Army Command. At Fort Gordon's Southeastern Signal School, he may study various phases of military communications, electronics. Also at Fort Gordon is the Provost Marshal School, where the duties of the military police are taught. Special attention is given to studies in riot control, techniques by which discipline, organization, and determination can control mob violence. The infantry school at Fort Benning is the Center for Advanced Training in Infantry Skills. This school has the responsibility for preparing infantry officers in the many areas of special military knowledge required in modern combat. Often referred to as the Queen of Battle, the infantry has always been the backbone of the Army. This traditional role of the infantryman is given greater significance by the study of newest combat techniques. The Air Mobility Department of the Infantry School conducts training for the airborne soldier. Basic courses in the parachute jump form the groundwork for a highly complex and demanding assignment. Training is provided for students from all branches of the military services, as well as from allied countries. The Army paratrooper must be expert in manipulation and control of his chute, in the use of his reserve parachute, and in emergency landing procedures. These and other airborne skills add up to a fast-moving, hard-hitting trooper, able to operate in difficult areas that may be inaccessible to other military units. At Fort Rucker, the Army Aviation School teaches all phases of aeronautics involved in Army operations. Training in fixed-wing and rotary-wing planes prepares Army personnel for flight assignments. Courses are offered in aerodynamics, meteorology, communications, and other subjects. With growing military requirements for mobility, Army aviation training fills a vital need. At 3rd Army's Fort McClellan, the Chemical School conducts training in the specialties of chemical and biological warfare. Instruction in decontamination of personnel and equipment prepares the soldier for operations in radiological combat situations. Fort McClellan also houses the Women's Army Corps Training Center, which provides instruction in a variety of administrative and technical specialties. As the need for these activities grows within the Army, the WACs provide a valuable capability of skills in support of the military mission.
Thanks, Fred.
Right. Well, this sure is a different Army. We didn't spend as much time in school.
That's right. That's exactly right, Fred. And there are really some very good reasons for it. The 3rd Army, just as in any of the other peacetime armies, is primarily engaged in training. And you're right about the fact that the modern soldier's training is longer and more comprehensive. It has to be, Fred. Modern warfare, like so many other things in life, has become more complex. There's so much more that he has to learn now.
New and improved weapons and combat techniques are constantly being developed. Tactical missiles with longer range and greater accuracy. Hard-hitting, more mobile armor. Greatly improved small arms, providing greater firepower. More effective Army aircraft in support of ground operations. All of these help the fighting man. But the complex materiel and techniques of modern combat can only be effective in the hands of soldiers who are skilled, resourceful, and confident individuals. Highly specialized training to develop these traits in today's soldier is carried on in various 3rd Army installations. At Fort Bragg, Special Forces training concentrates on intensive instruction in the organization of guerrilla and counter-guerrilla warfare. With subversion and insurgency a rising danger in many parts of the world, the Special Forces soldier must be ready to teach others how to defend their freedom. One of the most demanding of all Army training programs, Ranger training, is conducted at Fort Benning. For volunteers only, the Ranger program emphasizes training of the individual to a high degree of physical and mental capability. Exercises in hand-to-hand combat develop the student physically and increase his endurance. The Ranger student must go through a combat conditioning course exposed to stresses which often exceed those he might encounter in actual combat. Above all, he is taught initiative, the ability to act with complete confidence in any situation. In the early weeks of his training, the Ranger learns basic combat skills. He learns to live off the land and to survive the rigors of strange and hostile environments. A second phase of the training gives the Ranger experience in military mountaineering techniques. Smaller, highly trained units with unique military skills occupy a position of paramount importance in today's combat forces, which may be called upon to operate under any conditions of terrain or climate. Night Raid, a realistic exercise which puts Ranger training to the test. Successful completion of the rigorous Ranger course is an outstanding accomplishment for the individual man. For the Army, a superbly skilled soldier stands ready to serve. Periodically, units of the Third Army undergo practice alerts. Called without warning, they test the ability of the units to move from one place to another within a given period of time. The participants do not know until they are on their way whether or not this is an exercise Third Army units are also tested in full-scale field maneuvers, such as the series of swift strike exercises, to see how well they perform in a hypothetical combat situation. The techniques and tactics are those of actual combat to be tried and perfected. Swift strike exercises are joint Army-Air Force maneuvers, which give invaluable aid in polishing the teamwork between the ground and air arms of the military. With realism as the keynote, tough opposition is provided. An aggressor convoy is ambushed by specially selected troops. Prisoners are taken. Every attempt is made to simulate the incidents of actual combat.
As you know, our main purpose in all this is simply to be ready. The schools, exercises, maneuvers. They're all designed and maintained so that we will be ready at a moment's notice should the Third Army ever be needed for combat.
A lot of people feel that this readiness of yours is pretty expensive.
Not nearly as expensive as not being ready, Fred. Not by a long shot. This is a pretty explosive world we live in, and while I pray that it never happens, we could be called on at any time. It almost happened in the late fall of 1962.
Readiness for the defense of our nation, for the defense of freedom throughout the world. With international crisis a routine of our time, peaceful negotiations go hand in hand with military preparedness. The Cuban crisis of 1962 demonstrated vividly the readiness of all our military forces to respond to national emergency. Units at Third Army installations closest to the trouble spot were alerted. At Fort Campbell, the 101st Airborne Division was ready. This division jumped into Normandy in 1944 and made history in a Belgian town called Bastogne. It is still one of the Army's best trained and hardest hitting fighting units. At Fort Benning, the famous 2nd Infantry Division prepared for action. The Cuban crisis passed, but other trouble spots remain. Soldiers specially trained in Third Army installations may be called upon to serve in any of them. In Berlin, where barriers still divide the city, the American soldier has learned to live with crisis. Here, well-trained military units can move swiftly to deter aggression. Here, too, the soldier's discipline learned in training helps him through the long, tense periods of watchful waiting. In Vietnam, he is committed to help the free Vietnamese. The American Special Forces soldier, equipped with knowledge of the language and the nature of guerrilla warfare, is a valuable ally here. Vietnamese fighters are trained in the use of modern weapons and the techniques of jungle warfare. United States Army personnel accompany local troops in their actions against the enemy. Military support for Southeast Asia's free nations often calls for unusual combat skills which require intensive training on the part of the American soldier. In this effort, Third Army Special Training Programs perform an essential service. April 1964, at Third Army's Fort Campbell, the beginning of a unique military training operation designed to increase the readiness of the American fighting man to defend freedom wherever it is threatened. A brigade of the 101st Airborne Division embarks on air transports. Destination, Iran. Operation, Exercise Delaware, a combined Iranian-United States military training maneuver. Elements of the United States Strike Command participate. Army and Air Force units will be joined by American naval units in the Persian Gulf area, forming a joint task force. Object, to reinforce free Iranian troops in a simulated conflict against an aggressor. First stop, Turkey, where United States forces in Europe have prepared Tent City, a staging area for use by American troops before the maneuver. Located near the Turkish city of Adana, the marshalling area houses the equipment and facilities that will be involved in the drop operation. Preparations for the maneuver are carefully made. To the American airborne soldier, it will be a different and significant experience. For most of the men airlifted 6,000 miles from the Third Army area, the flight to the drop zone in Iran is a venture into a strange and distant country. Here, centuries before we were a nation, cultures flourished and armies struggled for power. Soon, Iranian troops taking part in the exercise will move toward the combat area, similar in appearance to our own southwest. In the early dawn, United States troopers jump over the desert plain near Dezful. Striking out across the rugged terrain, the troopers head for the first day's objective. In the 3 days of the maneuver,
they will be ready. In addition to assuring maximum combat effectiveness, this Army also strives to maintain and preserve the peace. This is the tradition and the continuing mission of the 3rd United States Army.